When you're a kid, your understanding of the world is really just based on the environment that you grow up in. Um, Especially if you're a boy, and especially if you have healthy and successful parents. You might be a girl, you might be a girl who has a strong personality and learns from a very young age that she will always just have to fight for what she wants or feels, and sometimes even just to be. That was me. I grew up in an area that was considered low income. There was never any shortage of other children to play with. Often the biggest challenge that we faced in a day was whether somebody wouldn't share a snack with you or maybe stole your best friend. Occasionally someone would stroll into the neighborhood and give me a funny feeling in my belly, and I would stay away from those people and tell my parents about it. Other kids may at times have been more curious than me. When we would go home for dinner at the end of the day, my brother and I would wash up and sit down at the table to eat dinner as a family. I was a picky eater, which helped to solidify my strong-willed nature from a very young age. I didn't really think very much about what we were eating or why, just whether I liked it or not. Sometimes my dad would get mad at me because I wouldn't eat, and other times my mom would bury her head in a book, which seemed to take her away to another place, which I later learned in my adult life was a coping strategy, so she wouldn't have to deal with fighting with me. Sometimes I would meet up with friends for another afternoon of aimless meandering, and they would tell us about their parents who weren't home last night and they had to make their own dinner, or that their dad was mad that they came home late and they were beat up. It was hard to digest those stories from other homes. At that age, it was a reference point for me that despite my family challenges, maybe I was lucky. I didn't have the worst childhood. My parents loved my brother and I. As young parents, I know that they did everything that they could for us growing up. We didn't get discriminated for other things that some other people very easily get discriminated for, such as religion or color of their skin, and that was something. School was never an enjoyable place for me. I didn't fit in with cool kids, and I didn't fit in with nerds either. I was a strong-willed, rough-and-tumble girl who would rather go out and play British Bulldog than pick flowers or make beaded bracelets. I wasn't a target often enough at school to make me feel afraid. That is, until I hit puberty. I was growing up to be what much of North American society considered to be a pretty girl. I had very long blonde hair, slightly upturned eyes and high cheekbones, and what seemed like overnight grew boobs. Mean girls had a new reason to target me. Boys noticed. They weren't always nice about it either. And that's when my anxiety at school shot through the roof. Being alone made me feel very conflicted. I was lonely a lot, but at least if I stuck to myself, I knew I was safe. I noticed in junior high school that girls stopped eating birthday cake. They whispered more among themselves and they smiled more at boys. They started doing things that didn't make sense to me. Eventually, I learned it was to get the attention of whomever it was that they were trying to impress. I didn't stop eating cake. And while this constant feeling of loneliness would likely have been temporarily relieved by the attention that they so calculatedly seeked, I simply was not willing to put that effort in yet. Life seemed to take a turn for me around the same time. My parents were fighting more. My brother seemed withdrawn. My dad and I fought more because he didn't like me trying to break out of the very controlled environment he and my mom had worked so hard to contain us in. I felt more alone than ever. I'm not sure if the decision to stop eating cake and smile more happened subconsciously or not, but it did happen. I didn't want to be alone anymore. Before I knew it, I was submerged in a world of makeup, hair products, and small, tight clothes. I started developing new friendships and hanging out with new people, some who were much older than myself. I wasn't alone anymore, and all I had to do was turn my eyes away from the physical and sexual abuse that was happening around me. Just keep smiling, be polite, and keep my fingers crossed that they didn't turn their sights on me. But be a part of the group and not a part of the danger. Just smile and be polite. They would share their drugs and alcohol. The drugs and alcohol made me feel warm and fuzzy, warm like a hug. And as long as I didn't argue too much or make too much noise, they wouldn't hurt me. And they didn't until they did. But by then it was too late. These people had turned into my friends, my family, my suppliers, as well as my sense of belonging, the ultimate drug for me. I knew I shouldn't be with them, but I was afraid to be alone again. I knew my parents would be disappointed, but they were going through their own challenges, and I just didn't feel like I could talk to them. Even though I wasn't alone anymore, I always felt on edge. The girls in the group who spoke up against the abuse they were enduring were cast out. And then I woke up at a party with someone on top of me, and I couldn't find my voice. And then I found myself at another party with a boy trying to tear my clothes off. I realized quickly that I had found my smile, but I had lost my voice. And as it turns out, a smile won't help you when you're in danger. I spent the next 23 years of my life smiling, being polite, makeup and hair always impeccable. Be a pretty girl, smile and be polite, but don't talk too much, or people might not like you. Rocking the boat enough in relationships to remind myself of who I was on the inside, but not enough to break myself out of the unhealthy cycle I found myself in repeatedly. Once in a while thinking about defying the expectations that I had grown so used to living by, then inevitably drawing back into the safety of being who I was expected to be. I can remember when I was 30 years old having a conversation about about my hair with a boyfriend. We had gone to the same high school and he remembered me with long blonde hair. He said it was beautiful and I knew it was. He insisted I grow it back. He said, short hair just isn't you. I asked, how can hair define who I am? That question erupted into a huge argument. And I never did end up cutting my hair again. Better to be safe and part of something than to have short hair and be alone. I had experienced loneliness repeatedly through my life and never wanted to feel it again. So just be quiet, smile, be polite, and grow your hair back. Being stuck in the body of someone who is no longer you is distressing. By the time I was in my mid-30s, I was miserable, searching for my strength and my happiness, but it always just seemed out of reach. Then on December 8th, 2017, 9 days before my 37th birthday, I was diagnosed with cancer. I hadn't been feeling well for a couple weeks, but I was still working out. It was about a week before my diagnosis that I locked a muscle in my hip at the gym. After visiting my doctor and taking an ibuprofen painkiller, I started bruising, and then blood vessels started bursting. And then I started hemorrhaging. I still didn't know that I was dying. After visiting my local emergency department, I was diagnosed and admitted to a cancer center the same day to start treatment for leukemia. I was told that if I had waited one more day, I likely would have died of a brain bleed. I was completely shocked and terrified. I can remember sitting in the hospital room 75 kilometers away from away from my home and thinking about losing my hair. I tried to tell myself that I wasn't sad or scared of it. I didn't want to be one of those people who worried more about their vanity than their own mortality. But the reality was, I was scared to look like a sick person, almost as much as I was afraid of dying. From the day I started chemotherapy to the day that my hair started falling out was 16 days. It started slowly with just a few extra strands, but within 48 hours was coming out by the handful. But I had made it through the first 10 days, and that was a huge achievement for me. Then on Christmas Day, in my hospital room, while hooked up to my daily chemo, my now husband proposed to me. It wasn't the backdrop I had always dreamed of growing up, but it was more meaningful than I ever could have hoped for. It said, at your worst, when our future is uncertain, I still want you, bald head and all. So I said yes, and then he cut my hair off. My husband is not a hairstylist, but I will admit that the undercut he gave me that day looked pretty darn good. It was exciting, and best of all, he made it fun. It lasted for 1 week. I was coming out in patches. My scalp hurt. What was left of my hair was knotted and dried looking. I couldn't go without a head wrap anymore. On New Year's Day, my husband shaved the rest of my hair off, and I sobbed in utter self-pity the entire time. Only made worse by showing my 5-year-old daughters, and for the first time in their lives, they were afraid of me. I spent weeks with a head wrap on, feeling humiliated, defeminized, and so vulnerable. It took 3 months for my hair to start growing back. When it grows back, it's not typical adult hair. It's basically just fuzz. But by then I had mustered enough courage to go out in public without a head wrap. I discovered big statement earrings and would put on a bright pop of lipstick if my treatment would allow it that week, and I rocked my bald head. I still felt vulnerable, unpretty, and exposed, but I adopted a fake it until you make it attitude while I was out. While I was at home, I spent a lot of time thinking about how I had changed. No matter how much I smiled or how polite I just wasn't a pretty girl anymore. As the time passed, I had to ask myself why I felt that way. I was fighting for my life, for crying out loud. Why did I link my value and my self-worth to how I looked? If I went back to work with no hair, would people still want to work with me? Was my husband still attracted to me? Could I ever look myself in the mirror again and say, I am beautiful and I am worthy? It took months of deep self-reflection, triggered by the worst experience of my life, to realize that I had never honored myself. The worst blow of all was that at the core of who I am, I had always known it. I decided then that I had not defied death to continue living my life the way that I was. So I did the kindest thing I had ever done for myself. I told myself it was never my responsibility to make other people feel comfortable by meeting their expectations of me. Not how I looked, not what I wore, not how I spoke, and not how I valued myself. It was certainly never okay for anyone to touch me without my explicit consent. I abandoned myself when I chose to surround myself with people who treated me poorly. And I cheated myself when I put myself in danger so that I didn't have to feel lonely. In fact, I realized that the loneliness I felt for so many years really had nothing to do with anyone else. Instead, it had everything to do with my inability to love myself. And so, understanding all of these things, I forgave myself. I'm a strong believer that in order to change the future, you must acknowledge the past. So after forgiving myself, I started creating boundaries for others and commitments for myself. I decided that I will no longer smile if I don't want to. In fact, there is research that suggests that smiling when we don't actually want to can be detrimental to our health. I choose to continue to be polite, but I do so carefully, protecting my energy and my boundaries. I no longer put myself in abusive or dangerous situations for any reason, least of all because I feel lonely. In fact, I rarely experience loneliness anymore. I've come to appreciate solitude thanks to the self-love and self-worth I practice daily. Most importantly, while I have a wonderful support system, I am the only person that I will ever seek validation from again, because I am the only person who can truly make me happy and whole, and I am free.
The doctor comes to me and says, you're never going to walk again. And I bawled my eyes out. And my point about this is that, understand, I was not a runner in the sense of, like, I didn't do marathons and things like that. But I enjoyed the fact, and I never really appreciated until that moment, the fact or to be thankful for the fact that if I told my body to do something, I could do it. So there I was lying there and having this person of authority, this person with more education than I did, telling me that, give me his opinion. So you need to understand this. You will come across these moments in your life where people who probably have some influence over you, some authority over you, will give you their opinion. And some of these people might even think they're trying to do you a favor. This might be your best friend. This might be your parents. People will have an opinion about you for a lot of things. My point is, do you accept their opinion or not? And as I lay there on this hospital bed, thinking about the fact that this man said, not only will I walk again, not only will I never run again, I may not be able to ever walk properly again. And I was devastated because I was relatively young at the time. And if you can imagine, people will tell you all kinds of things. The question is, do you accept this or not? Do you accept somebody else's opinion as your reality? And the temptation, especially when you're broken, especially when you are in a moment of trial, especially when you're in a moment where you are doubting everything, do you accept their opinion in that moment or not? That's the question that you have to ask yourself. So here's the irony. I work with people with disabilities. I work with people with autism. I work with people with behavioral challenges. I work with people that try to commit suicide. I work with people with anxiety disorders. But until that moment, I never really thought about things from their perspective. And maybe you haven't either. But it doesn't matter whether you do or don't, because at some point in your life, if you are living life, you will come across a moment of self-doubt. You will come across a moment of trial. And in that moment, what is most important is, what do you put in your head? What do you say to yourself when we talk about the self-talk? What is your most important self-talk in that moment? What do you say to yourself in those times of trial? Do you say to yourself, I've always failed? Or do you say to yourself, no, I might have failed a lot of things, but I've also accomplished a lot of things? Do you even have a list? Do you even know what you've accomplished? Could you rhyme off a couple of things that you're actually proud of? Because I can tell you, at that point in my life, maybe I hadn't. Maybe I didn't know all the things that I should be proud of having accomplished. And in those moments of self-doubt, in those moments of trials, that is when the thing that you put in your brain, the thing that you say to yourself, is the most important. More than anybody else's opinion of you, that is the most important thing to say to yourself. So I was sitting there and I'm listening to what this man says. Then I listen to what the nurse says. Do I accept all of this? No, I don't. Now, don't get me wrong. I bawled my eyes out when they told me this. But I'd had the good fortune of being around people who thought differently, who thought positively, who had failed and failed and failed again and tried yet one more time. Ancient Chinese proverb, fall down 6 times, get up 7. And so I'd been around people like that. And I said, if they could accomplish those things and still come back after all the things that they'd overcome, surely I could overcome this. Now, understand this. There are lots of people in this world who have overcome insurmountable obstacles, people who have achieved miracles. And there's one of them called the Miracle Man. You can actually Google him, Morris Goodman, the Miracle Man. He crashed his small airplane, and he fractured his C6 and C7 in his neck. He crushed his lungs. He broke every single major bone in his body and bruised every single major muscle in his body, to the point that he couldn't even swallow without the aid of a machine. And doctors said he would die. Or if he didn't die, he would be in a vegetated state for the rest of his life. Well, not only did he not die, but it took him a couple of years, he walked out of the hospital on his own power. And he does motivational talks all over the world. Those are the kinds of people that I listen to. I don't listen to people who say you can't do. I don't listen to people who say, you know what, you failed and failed and failed. What makes you think you could do again? Forget those people and forget that opinion. Your job, the most important thing you could do in any situation, but especially when you're struggling, is to say to yourself, do I choose to make somebody else correct, or do I choose to make myself correct? Do I choose to accept somebody else's opinion as my reality, or do I choose to create my own reality? It is so easy to listen, especially when it's somebody who you think cares for you. And those people, I'm not saying those people don't care for you. This could come from your parents. This could come from your best friend. Like I said, this could come from your teacher. It doesn't matter. What are you saying to yourself when they give you their opinion? Do you accept that as your truth, or do you speak to your own truth? Do you accept that as your reality, or do you create your own reality? And so as I lay there in this hospital bed, and I thought about all the people that I've worked with, some of whom have profound disabilities, some of whom they're quadriplegic. That means they are done, everything is done for them. They have a mouth, they have a head, they have eyes, they have a nose, and that's about it in terms of functioning level. But most importantly, they have a brain, they have a mind, and that mind thinks thoughts. Well, I thought, shoot, if they could think positive, if they could find a reason to live, so can I. If they can find a reason to smile, then hell, so can I. And that is what I choose to put in my brain. That is what I choose to remember in those times of trial. Not the opinion of somebody who, again, smarter than me, more experienced than me. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You say what you got to say. You make your own truth. All right? So after having a good cry, after spending a little bit wallowing and having my pity party, then I thought, whoa, give yourself a checkup from the neck up. Change the way you think, unless you want to make this man true, unless you want to make this man your boss. And I said, no, I'm not going to do that. So I started thinking positively, and from all of that, I got my thinking right. The doctor, the surgeon, showed up the next day. And when he showed up the next day, I thought I was going to have this really great, made-for-TV moment where I was going to tell him something motivational, and he was going to, look at me and look at me differently. Sadly, that didn't happen. But when he came in the room, he looked at the work that he'd done, and he looked at my x-rays and everything else. He says, it looks like we've done all we can do for you. And so do you have any questions? And I said, Doc, I don't have any questions, but I do have a comment. My comment is this. You might know your work, but you don't know me. And you say I'm never going to run again and probably never going to walk again properly. I don't accept that because you don't know me. I'm going to run again. And if I don't run again, it'll be because I said so, not because you said so. And I thought he was going to, have this really great moment with me. He didn't. But for a brief moment, he looked at me not as a patient, not as a procedure. He looked at me as a person. And he turned to me, looked at me, and he said, good for you. And he walked out. And so my point about all this is that at the end of it all, it doesn't matter what that man's opinion of me is. It doesn't matter what others think of me. It doesn't matter what he thought of me. It matters what I think of myself. And I emerged from that. I was not spiritually broken. I was not emotionally broken. I might have been physically broken for about 6 months. But at the end of it all, I emerged stronger emotionally, physically, and spiritually. Why? Because I chose to make my own reality and not have somebody else's opinion become my truth. So the end of the story was that it took another 6 months and another surgery, but I do run again. I do walk again. Now, I don't run quite as fast as I used to, but I run pretty fast. But that's not important. That's not important to you. That's not really important to the story. It's important to me. Okay? What's important to other people, and when I tell the story, what's important is the fact that I could very easily, yet again in my life, come across an obstacle and let it beat me because others had. But I programmed myself with enough positivity. I programmed myself with enough positive thinking. And I'd gotten to know myself enough to say, you know what? I'm going to emerge from this and I'm going to create my own reality. And that's the point.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me. As I was stating before with the story, due to all that's happening today, I just find this kind of eerie that this topic is here for me to share with you all. But I'm going to try and be as positive as I can in something that wasn't so positive. So again, my name is Michelle. And I am going to start by telling you it started with a junior high school crush that then evolved into my high school sweetheart. And then after ended up myself and my high school sweetheart, we had a young girl, our daughter, Tiana. And although we were young ourselves and everything was happening so fast, that year that I found out that I was having a daughter, I was supposed to be starting at Humber College for acting for film and television. And my high school sweetheart, the year after, was starting for fashion design. He wanted to help to have, so he himself was 1 credit short, and with his 1 credit short, he was taking a night school, at night school, a parenting course. Funny enough, because at that time, our daughter was, so January, he was taking night school. He would finish around 10 o'clock at night and usually take a bus to Markham, which is where his aunt was staying. I was staying with his aunt for a short time frame because with us having our new baby, our bundle of joy, his whole family was excited and wanted to be around her. So at this particular night, he was already at school, finishing up his program, his night school class, and I was in Markham with his aunt and a few of his cousins. He has a large amount of family, so there was a lot of his cousins there visiting too. But on this particular night, we just noticed that Javen, is his name, was taking very long to come home. So we just waited it out because sometimes he was a little bit late. The bus takes some time. We know it takes a bit for him to get back. However, we were all in his aunt's living room, his family and I, and the 11 o'clock CP24 news came on, and we got the breaking news that someone had been shot at McCowan and Finch, which is where I originally lived, he lived, and where his school was, his night school was. So for me, in that moment, I don't know what came over me, but I just felt like it was him. I just felt it to the gut of me. I was looking at everybody else's reaction in the room, and it didn't seem like they had a reaction. But the sad part of that was his aunt felt the need to do a head count. What the head count was to count all his family, his cousins, because a lot of them were males, all his cousins, to make sure that everybody was home safe and everybody was okay and it wasn't them. I think that's just the saddest thing ever, that we have to be in a position where we're doing head counts. But everybody responded. Everyone was saying, Auntie, we are okay. Everything's fine. However, Javen was the only one that didn't respond. And when we called him on his cell phone, it would just go to voicemail. So we all decided about 12 o'clock now. He still wasn't there, but a lot of them were deciding it's just time to go to bed. Figure he will come when he's ready. He will be there. But for me, I just wasn't feeling good. So myself, his aunt, and our daughter, we went to one room, we went to sleep, but actually I was still up because I felt funny. Then about maybe 2 a.m. in the morning, we get a banging on the door. And the banging on the door, and we were hearing a voice, which happened to also be another cousin, also our daughter's godfather, shouting, Auntie, Auntie, open the door, open the door. So we run downstairs to hear him say, come quick, Auntie, Auntie, we need to go to the hospital. Javen has been shot. So in me, I just felt empty, no tears, no angers, no emotions, but his aunt couldn't do it. His aunt was like, I'm not going to go. I will watch the baby. You guys go. So before we headed to the hospital, we had to go to his mother's house to inform her. And that was just devastating. She wasn't taking the news well. She was in denial. And it was almost like we had to push her in the car, the police cruiser. So the police officer took us to the hospital, and it was Sunnybrook. And I knew when I heard Sunnybrook, it wasn't good. But when we got there, yes, Javen was in the worst state ever, but beside him, which was, again, so sad to me, were two other Black males that also had been shot earlier on that day at different time frames. So I have to say to you, at that year, they call it the year of the gun, 2004, 2003, 2004, because there was a lot of gun violence happening back and forth, back and forth. Unfortunately, Javen did not make it. That was devastating for me. But again, I felt like I prepared myself from the moment I heard the news because I felt it. The hard part about all of this is he leaves back his daughter, which all of this didn't affect her until she turned 14. My daughter is now 17. But at the age of 14, one of her friends Googled her name at class, in her classroom, and all that information came up because it was on the news. And that's when all the questioning of who he is, what is he like. So as I told the last group, counseling was something that helped both of us, her and myself. I don't want you guys to ever be afraid of that. There is a stigma with counseling and not needing help and being afraid to ask for help, but I want you guys to reach out whenever you feel that you need that help. Now, I don't want this message to be all sad and draining for you all, because there's enough of that going on. But the reason why I'm telling this story is because I feel if Javen were alive today, he would have this message for you. Unfortunately, his case is cold, meaning that we never solved it. But I never used to like the company that he kept. Nice guy, but I didn't like some of the people that he surrounded himself with. And I would always voice that to him. And I want you all to know that I feel like if he was alive today, he would say to please be mindful of the company you keep. I don't like to sound preachy. I don't like to sound like your mom. And it's just that sometimes you're just guilty by association. So you could be just hanging out with someone that is bad news, and you decided to take a drive home with this person from school. And something goes down, and that's just it. You were there in the car with that person. You need to be very mindful, be careful. I'm not saying he was in a gang or anything like that, but some of the youth males especially are getting into gangs today, feeling like they have this need to fit in. I need you to understand that some of the people that Javen surrounded himself with, I didn't see them at his funeral. So all this loyalty and this code, it doesn't apply when things go down. You understand? So I just want you guys to be very mindful of that, especially my young males, because I see more of it being with you. Please watch the company. Keep your head straight on to the goals that you want to accomplish, because when I was there with you all, I do remember a lot of you expressing some of the goals and things that you wanted to accomplish for yourself. As much as I do miss Javen, I'm proud of the fact that he left me with an amazing 17-year-old. She's doing so well. I'm so proud. She has one more year left in high school. Plans on being and I'm so proud of her for this, and I know he would be too. So again, I don't want this to be dark, because again, you all see what's happening on social media right now, and it makes me so sad that 2004 we were experiencing gun violence, and then here we are in 2020 and it's still happening. It's so sad. I just want to show one picture, and I hope it doesn't trigger anybody too bad. But in this picture, these are all the cases in 2003 and 4, just the beginning of all 4, of all the people that were murdered in some form and hasn't been solved. Right here is Jamin. But the irony of this was, a couple months before his passing, this was one of his teachers, and his teacher passed away through a robbery. It's just so sad, and I don't understand what's really going on and why we're in this place, and I'm hoping one day things will change. I have such high hopes. But again, I just want you all to keep yourself in a positive place. And again, with the social media today, if it's too much for you all, don't be afraid to turn it off. Step away from it and surround yourself by people that are going to make you feel all right, because it does have an impact on your mental health. One last thing I want to share, you guys, one last photo. This gentleman right here was one of the paramedics that picked him up. He passed away at a bus stop, but he did state that one of his last words was, he has a little girl. And I would give anything to thank this man just for being with him and being there, helping him with what was maybe his last words. And I just appreciate this guy, and I try very hard to reach out and find and just pass that message to him, although it's years later. But my thing for you all is, I don't want that situation to ever happen to any of you. So again, if you have a friend or a brother, anyone that you care about, a cousin, tell them my story if you can. Just because I don't want you to ever be in that position where you're left behind, or leave people that love you behind.
Thank the youth group for putting on this event tonight and allowing me to be part of it, and all of you for attending and checking me out as your library book. So my name is Laurie Beasley, as she said, and I actually work for the Scarborough Centre for Healthy Communities. I'm the coordinator of volunteer engagement and student placement. So tonight I'm going to talk about our son and his disability and share a little bit about our family story. So our son Mitchell was born in October of 1994, and he was born with a cleft lip. So he had a birth defect, and it was operated on twice at SCHC when he was less than 5 months old. And at the time, I remember standing there holding him after his surgery thinking, boy, I hope this is the worst thing that he ever has to go through. Little did I know what was going to come. So we started to suspect that there was something, some issues with Mitchell when he was less than 6 months old. He just wasn't meeting his developmental milestones by a lot. And so what we got told was that a baby's mouth developmentally at that age is like a third hand. And because Mitchell wasn't allowed to put anything near his mouth at all, it could cause the delays that he was experiencing. So we kind of went along with that theory until his first birthday checkup. And most 1-year-olds are either walking or close to walking. Meanwhile, Mitchell couldn't get from a lying down to a sitting position on his own. He couldn't lie down by himself, and he couldn't even crawl. He sort of just scooted along on his bum, and that was if he was really motivated to get somewhere. So our doctor sent us to a pediatric neurologist, and she examined him and suggested that we start physiotherapy, which we did. So she told us at that appointment that our son, who was just over a year old, was 6 to 9 months behind where he should be developmentally. So he was actually closer to a newborn than he was a 1-year-old. So that was really devastating. We started physiotherapy. We all worked really hard. And when, after 3 months, we went back to see her for another checkup, we were really happy and thrilled with the progress that he was making. But she wasn't impressed at all. So she said, okay, next step is I'm going to send you down to SCHC and we're going to do an MRI. So she wanted to look at his brain. So we waited about 4 months for that appointment, and we continued doing physiotherapy, and we started speech therapy as well. And about a month after we had the MRI, we had the results, and we were told good news, bad news. So the good news was that his brain looked normal. The bad news was, here we were at this point almost a year after we had started watching, noticing things that were up with Mitchell, and we still didn't have any answers. So the doctor told us, you're just going to have to live with his delays. He's developmentally delayed, and you're never going to know why. But we said we weren't ready to give up, that we wanted answers. We wanted more. So Mitchell was almost 2 years old at this point. He had just taken his first steps. He started walking just after that, but it had taken a year of intense therapy to get him to that point. So as a last resort, the physiotherapist said to us, the neurologist, she sent us to a geneticist. So that doctor examined him like nobody had before. She even, I remember, looked at his fingerprint patterns, and she asked us tons of questions. And at the end, she said, let me take some blood work and come back and see me in 6 weeks. So we went back, and on October 9th, 1996, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, we got a diagnosis for Mitchell. We were told that he had something called Fragile X syndrome. We'd never heard of Fragile X syndrome before, but we learned a lot about it, and fast, because we had to. It's the most common inherited cause of developmental disability in the entire world, and it affects every race equally. It can exist silently for many generations in a family before it impacts someone, and that's what happened in our case. We had no prior family history of anyone with an intellectual disability. So then I got tested, and I found out that I was the carrier who passed on this condition to our son. So that was very devastating, learning that you're the reason that your child has a disability. And we learned that 1 out of every 256 women in the world are carriers of Fragile X syndrome and run a 50-50 chance of passing this on to any future children. So I will share that I've been pregnant 5 times. Each time I was more than 3 months pregnant, and we only have 2 children. So the day that we got Mitchell's diagnosis, we were told that he would be severely affected his entire life. He would always need special help in school, and he would probably never learn how to read or write. He would never go to college or university. He'd never drive a car, get married, or have children of his own. He would never have a typical or normal job and never live on his own. He would have to learn to live and work in a supportive environment his entire life. The doctor said to us, your son has a permanent neurological disability, which is severe and lifelong. All of Mitchell's physical, cognitive, and daily living skills will be impaired by this diagnosis. There is no cure, and that's still true today. The news came just 2 days after his 2nd birthday. We were devastated, of course. My husband and I cried. We told our families. We cried. We told our friends. We cried even more. A lot of dreams died that day. But out of that devastation did emerge hope. We finally had a name for what Mitchell had, and we were armed with an answer. We had a diagnosis finally. We entered the special needs world on October 9th, and we've never left. So a few months later, in early 1997, the Fragile X Research Foundation of Canada was being formed. The foundation needed a logo designed, and I needed knowledge. So I offered to design the logo, and I was asked to be on the board of directors. I used to be a graphic designer and a studio manager. I went to university for fine arts and then went to college for graphic design. I'm now a senior director on the Fragile X board, and I have been for 23 years. The board is made up 100% of parents, and we are all parents of kids with Fragile X syndrome, and we all work to fund research grants to try and find a cure or an effective treatment. And we do this in our spare time. I also run a parent support group, a mom support group for kids with Fragile X syndrome, and both my husband and I talk to newly diagnosed families across Canada. I presented at community groups and been interviewed on TV, and I've done endless school presentations. So my husband started to volunteer at Community Living Toronto and was getting more and more involved. He sat on their board for over 6 years. Not getting involved was just never an option. The more invested we became, the more that we learned, the more that we talked to other people, the more we shared our story, the more we talked to other parents. Not surprising, we became more empowered ourselves, and we felt that this huge entity in our lives wasn't as big, this big thing that had come crashing into our lives and was there to stay. We started to have a little bit of power over it. So we learned the hard way to become advocates. Mitchell wasn't able to speak up for himself, so we had to do it for him. The school and the TDSB were where we really honed our skills as advocates. Every year, fighting to keep him involved in his regular classroom in our neighborhood school, fully integrated with the proper supports in place, took weeks of practice and planning. We became known as the parents who would not back down or be intimidated. And we had this whole advocacy philosophy that sort of evolved, and we became known as the parents that had the velvet gloves over top of the iron fists. We would ever so politely tell the school that the plans that they had for Mitchell and his education didn't match what we thought was best for him, and we would back that up with research and facts that we would present in these beautiful red folders, bound and collated, and along with a serving of homemade chocolate chip cookies. So was it emotionally draining? Yes. Was it worth it? Absolutely, yes, 100%. We became more involved, and as we did professionally, what we were doing, working and earning a living, didn't match with how we felt we should be living in the world. So my husband kind of went first. He made a decision, and he spent 2 years, evenings and weekends, taking nonprofit management courses, and he added that to his already existing university degree. He had a small marketing company. It was just him and one part-time employee, and he ended up folding that. And he's now the CEO of Community Living Ontario, and he has been for 7 years. They advocate for people at a provincial level who have intellectual disabilities and their families. And he says ever since he got that job, he's never worked a day because it's his passion and it doesn't feel like work to him. So during that time, we lost 3 pregnancies. But finally, our daughter Erin was born when Mitchell was 6.5 years old. We were thrilled, and she's an amazing person today. Mitchell loves her, and even took her to school one year when he was in kindergarten, took her for show and tell. During this time, Mitchell was also diagnosed with autism, and so that just added another layer of complexity to our lives. It's very common for people with Fragile X syndrome to have diagnosis of autism as well. So he actually has a dual diagnosis, they call it. It was kind of a nutsy time of our lives. I had to bring baby Aaron along to all of his therapy appointments. We did occupational therapy, physiotherapy, speech and language, seating therapy, modified behavior therapy, handwriting therapy, and a lot more. Meanwhile, I was getting burnt out. I was working full-time as a studio manager, and I'd be scrambling to meet these crazy advertising deadlines. And I'd come home and my husband was helping people and impacting their lives. So I knew I had to make a change as well. I was fortunate that Hall and Bloorview Kids Rehabilitation Hospital was looking for a parent with lived experience. They wanted a parent of a child with special needs. And I applied and I got the job, and I made a career change. I worked there for 4 years and I loved it. And I managed the family leaders. I got involved in research while I was there, and I ran the Autism Parent Support Group. And when my contract ended, I started working at SCHC, and that's about 2 years ago, almost 2 years ago. So Mitchell's now 25 years old, and he lives with us, although we're working on that. He wasn't toilet trained until he was 8. Because of his many sensory issues that he has, he won't take showers and he hates being outside in the rain. He needs constant coaching to bathe properly in the bathtub, to shave, and to brush his teeth. Coming home in the dark is an ordeal for him. It makes transitioning from outside into the house very bad, and it's one of the reasons I hate winter, because it gets dark so early. He loves watching Supertramp, Queen, and Elvis Presley concerts on DVD, but he also spends an equal amount of time watching The Wiggles, Sesame Street, and Scooby-Doo. He has a great sense of humor. He will laugh at knock-knock jokes even if he's heard them hundreds of times. He'll always share half his chocolate bar with you. He tells me every day that he loves me, and at 25, I think that's pretty amazing. He gives great hugs, and he has a red ride-on tractor lawnmower that he rides up and down the long driveway at my husband's family's cottage, and he named it Trixie, and he loves it so much he shakes with excitement when he knows he's going to be driving Trixie. So I just want to leave you with this, that knowledge is power. If you feel passionate about an issue or a cause, educate yourself with facts and learn as much as you can about it. Whether you become an advocate by choice or it's forced upon you by circumstances that life throws at you, don't run away from it. Please embrace it, because it's going to flow into every aspect of your life. It's going to change you, and it's going to make you better forever. And lastly, I just want to say I wouldn't trade Mitchell for anybody else in the entire world, except for one, and that would be Mitchell without Fragile X and autism. And so thank you for listening. That was my story.